Hey guys, now I have a cast coming up here that I'm really excited about. This is an idea I've kind of had in mind, and I'm finally starting to get to put it into practice. Beforehand, I'll do the introductions. I am the Zerg player in the top right, the blue Zerg player, Rekatan. Lower left, there we go. We have OT Hydra. He's going to be our red Terran player. I'm going to have this on my view for the entire game. And the reason is because I'm doing a new series called Before and After. It's going to be 2 games back to back. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at first a game that I lose. And it's a game that I had kind of a conclusion at the end of it. I said, you know, this is why I lost. Let's fix just that one issue and see what happens. And then the after, the second part of the cast, is going to be the result of that change at a later game so that we can kind of get a direct comparison. I'm going to try and pick fairly similar games so that we kind of have a accurate representation of whether we saw an improvement. But I felt like this just by far was a huge turning point for me in looking at my ZVT, and so it felt like a great time to start the series. The way I kind of got the idea for this is it's kind of representative of how I learned the game. I try to always take one thing that I can improve from a loss and then make that change in future games and then gauge whether that was an improvement or whether I'm not on the right track. But making that stick is always, you know, kind of difficult. So I felt like this might be a way to kind of get you guys involved because first off, casting through this is going to help me to kind of help with retention. But then in the other regard, later on, you know, you can keep me honest. If you find that I'm not improving from the mistakes that I've learned from in these games, and you see later on in casts or on my stream that I'm not actually putting that into practice, then you can give me a nudge and say, hey, you know, you remember that cast you did a while back where you decided this was a good way to go. And unless, you know, something big changed in the metagame or something, then, you know, you guys can help me make this stick. So I think this will be pretty cool. And that's also why this is going to be from my perspective, because a lot of this is going to be kind of what do I see, what do I evaluate. So early on, pretty basic. I see a refinery. The refinery timing looks about right for Reaper. And then I just hang out for a little bit just to you know, get a decent idea as to whether, you know, maybe there's actually a Marine coming out with a Hellion follow-up. But more often than not, that's going to be Reaper. For my build, it's just going to be a 15 hatch, 16 pool. I'm doing this with a drone scout on 2-player maps and without a drone scout on 4-player maps. I feel like pretty much unless they're map hacking and just proxy raxing, it's actually safe to skip the drone scout as long as you make 4 Zerglings. And now that's another big change that I've made, is normally I'm making 4 Zerglings. Actually, this game I didn't. That's interesting. I have been trying to do that. I wonder what happened here that caused me to go 2 Queen and a Spine, because I've pretty much decided that this is inferior for holding Reapers. Right now, Zerglings would be popping, and I would not be forced to pull off mining so much. Fortunately, I get a little cute with the Evo Chamber and the Extractor, but it looks like this drone is not noticed. Okay. So I forgot about that drone. That's a big whoops on my part. But otherwise, we're going to be okay. But yeah, that's why 4 Zerglings is a lot better than the Spine Crawler, even if it does set you back by 1 drone. Alright, so I go ahead and let that Extractor finish. And the reason for that is because at this point, I'm more than likely going to go ahead and go for a Roach push, which means I'm going to need 2 Extractors momentarily anyway, so it doesn't really make sense to cancel those Extractors and put the drone back at risk when I'm going to be using that Extractor soon anyways. This high ground Spine Crawler, I don't know that I necessarily need it. It was in response to the second Reaper. Ooh, 4 on gas. Fix that. I don't know if I ever fix that this game. That's fun. Yeah, that's in response to the second Reaper. I don't know that, given that I'm going such a fast Roach Horn, that I'll necessarily need it. And I do cancel it. Okay. So, that's good. But yeah, honestly, I think I could have held a lot better without the loss of the drone if I had gone 4 Zerglings and would not need the Spine since I'm going into Roach Horn pretty quickly. You pretty much only need the Spine if you know he's going into Hellions immediately following. This Roach Horn, out of position. I need a pool or a Roach Horn back there to block that Reaper run by. I was kind of kicking myself when that occurred, because otherwise you force him to run through the mineral line, and that's great because then you can get a surround on him. But in this case, they're actually even blocking my drones from preventing him from running by. I was trying to get back there and block him, but instead my Roach Horn was in the way. I thought I could squeeze through there. So So far, we're off to a rough start, but this is not actually what I wanted to look at here as to the, why did I lose and what will we fix. This is just all fixed by going those 4 Zerglings rather than 2. But fortunately, we're about ready to go ahead and make those roaches. Burrow should be starting momentarily. There it is. And we're pretty high here on our resources, so we should be spending that. Part of that is when you allow these Reapers to run wild like this, you get so distracted. Like if we look at this, I've missed 2 injects effectively. 3 injects. Because we've got 1 queen at 25 energy, 1 queen at 50 energy. So, not so good. But that's really just how it goes when you're defending Reapers with nothing but queens. You just can't free up the queens to actually do what they're supposed to be doing at this stage of the game. Alright, so now the roach push is moving out. Better late than never. Usually I like this to be moving at about 7:15 rather than 8:15. This would be a lot more effective. But here we go, we're pushing out, we're going to double expand behind it, and we'll see if we can get something done now. And I do want to look at the income tab for this. I know people really like the production tab, but I think the income tab is actually going to be a lot more important to see for this stage, or for this game, for this cast. So we have 2 hatcheries going down, and at this point with this little contain, this isn't meant to do any damage. What this is going to do is going to allow me to drone up extremely heavily. I really like it a lot for Neoplanet because these expansions are really tough to defend. They're just so far away from your natural. And so what I like about it is that you're going to be able to sack one of them and just transfer whatever drones that were at that 3rd or 4th to the other remaining base. And unless they kill 2 bases at the same time, then you're up a base or you're on equal bases if they expanded behind the attack. And really all I'm concerned about is being on equal bases. Now with this, all I'm trying to do is bait the Widow Mine into firing, burrow, allow it to hit. And this was something that actually one of my students, I can't remember his, I want to say it's Narya. I remember his name, but not his in-game name, and I don't know if he'd be comfortable with me giving his name, if that makes any sense. Anyways, I had never known that you could actually burrow and completely subvert the direct damage of a Widow Mine. I always just soaked up 1 shot, burrowed, and regened. But actually, if you burrow right as the Widow Mine fires, then you'll only take the splash damage, which means you can soak up quite a few shots with these roaches without actually losing anything. And the reason I'm doing this is because the more Widow Mine shots I can soak up, the less inclined he's going to be to move out. He really wants to be moving out with all of those Widow Mines charged and ready, so that if he gets a good drop on me, he can clear out all my roaches in one fell swoop. But now, if we actually take a quick look, he's loaded. I only thought there was maybe 2 or 3 up front, but he is so heavy on Widow Mines. And some of that's because of how late my push was, and how kind of choreographed it was. He basically could read it because he saw the Roach Warren go down, he saw the double gas, he knew I was probably saving up for burrow. There's just so much there that was telling. Okay, so we're starting to get to the point that I really want to kind of point out here, is I double expanded and I've got this nice big jolt of mineral income. I'm finally way ahead on his economy. Equal gas, but about 500 more minerals. So that's great. But the one thing that I realized at the end of this game is pretty consistently, in fact, games when I get this economy going, first off, I'm over-droning because, like I was saying in previous casts, ZBT, you don't want to end the game at 80 drones. You maybe want to go up to 80 drones and then drop spines, spores, and tech structures to get down to 65 to 70. But I'm taking that a step further here, and I realized that actually there's a stage where I want to make spines and then remake the drones. Maybe make spines again and then remake the drones. Repeat that process a few times, actually, rather than just... turn down my game audio here. I think it should be low for you guys, but it's really loud in my headphones for some reason. Repeat that process a few times because when I do move into Swarm Host, I'm going to want to be aggressive with them rather than defensive, but then also to survive to the stage of the game that I need to, I'm also going to need a lot more spores and spines than I've been making. This I was really proud of. Hydra the entire time transfused. I loved it. I felt so cool. Like, yeah, that's right. I just transfused a Hydra and kept him alive the entire time. But yeah, look at these minerals. That's what I'm trying to fix here, because at this stage of the game, I'm pulling my queens for defense. So first off, I'm a little bit larva starved, but I'm not quite at the point where I want to be making swarm hosts, which will compensate for that with the larva efficiency that swarm hosts provide. So in the middle of that, I should be dumping minerals into spines. And depending on what I see, maybe just getting some infestors, which are very larva efficient. So right now, when I'm at, well, actually right before this production cycle, because let's see what I just made. Some overlords, some drones, some upgrades. Really, those minerals, I think I should have actually dropped into, well, I know now after kind of a few more games, I should have dropped those into spines. And I'm saying maybe 5 spines and 1 spore, maybe 5 spines and 2 spores here. This is the less threatened base. It's a little harder to reach for him, given that he's expanding here, so he's going to be able to defend and then push. So this is the less likely base to be attacked, but I would still say maybe 2 spores, since it's more likely to have medevacs, 2 to 4 spores, and still 2 to 3 more spines. So altogether, I can count both of my tertiary bases, we'll call them, my 3rd and 4th, and say I've got probably a grand total of 15 to 20 spines between the two. And then, you know, a respectable number of spores. That's not including what's back at home to defend against drops either, but that's just to make sure that I don't lose to, well, this. So, I guess I'll pause here for a moment. Look at the positioning that he was allowed, because I only had 2 spines and a spore defending this 3rd. He was able to, first off, cut my reinforcements off from my 3rd. Never a good place to be as a Zerg player, because that means these spawns are basically forfeit. Especially if you're control grouping your eggs, they're going to basically just move command right into their own death. Or even if they do spawn attacking, they'll die so quickly. So hypothetically speaking, let's say I had maybe 5 spines here, and just a couple spores up near the front to shoo the medevacs away. A lot of times players are just going to flat out lose medevacs to that because they keep them all in the same control group, or keep the medevacs on a follow command behind one of their marauders. So the medevacs are just going to completely ignore the spores and run into their death. So that's all well and good. What that also does is when he approaches, he's going to be in a position where, first off, he's fighting on creep, so vision's not a concern. And he's attacking into 4 or 5 spines, which, if I'm out of position, it buys me time. Still pretty good. If I'm in position, more importantly, I pretty much just have a all-out win there. 4 or 5 spines with the army I had before I started taking losses is easily going to hold what he has here. And the biggest reason for that is because mines won't be in range. It's physically impossible for them to get into range. And that's a huge hole in biomine that we as Zerg players have not been capitalizing on. By foregoing the siege tank portion of biomech in favor of mines, Terran have actually made themselves vulnerable to spine crawlers, which I know is kind of weird to think about, because how can they be vulnerable to spine crawlers? They basically just can't punish them because they have nothing to break down that static defense. Bio does pretty well, but that's when it's dealing with 2 or 3 spines. When it's dealing with 5 to 10 spines, then it's just not cost effective, because your spines are damaging through the medevac heal, and throw in some transfuse, and you've actually got a really favorable engagement. So let's go ahead and play this out the rest of the way. Ooh, I'm sorry for the spoiler, should have turned that off, but I'm not too worried about that. I already spoiled the game at the start anyways. And notice my drone count as well. So had I made those 10 to 15 spines and spores, I'd be right around 65 drones before losses, which is right where I want to be. And notice my minerals. There's been a few moments that I dropped down below 1,000, but otherwise they've been very high. And that's because I'm not injecting. I'm busy trying to defend with my queens instead, which is what I want to do, but it also means I need to reshape how I think about where my resources go, because really all I'm trying to do is survive with 3 bases intact. And he actually cut off my drones by kind of catching me off guard there, to where I couldn't even get him over to the other base so that they weren't lost. Alright, so at this point, he's pushing up. I did make my swarm host transition, but at this point it's way too clumsy. You really need that swarm host transition to occur in a time when he's actually just been recently fended off, so you can afford to really commit to that production. You know, you just held him off, he's running back with his tail between his legs, and you just get to mash down the key for 16 consecutive swarm hosts. The next time he pushes out, you basically just push him away for free, and you can go ahead and begin trading. Or if he goes for some kind of drop-heavy play, then you just move your swarm host right across the map, aggressively position him outside of his Natural, potentially. I prefer the natural if you can reach it. Certain maps you won't be able to, but then that allows you to cut off his production regardless of his economy. So at this point, I know it's pretty much over, given all the losses I've taken, but it's kind of one of those where sometimes you just play it out to try and see how well you can do given the circumstances. And I feel like at this stage of the game, I didn't handle it too badly. I would have liked to have seen some burrow micro, maybe. After all, I did research it. Might as well use it. There was a couple times there where I hit some burrow micro, but nothing too terribly special. But, I mean, we pretty much know at this stage that with no static defense, my swarm hosts are never going to be able to go on the offensive. I do have 2,300 minerals, so there's definitely nothing stopping me from making that static defense. And that's largely because I lost my queens, and I'm not really even thinking much about this game in terms of, oh, let's keep producing so we can keep up. You know, admittedly, I was spending probably more time talking to the stream than I was playing at this point. So we go ahead and get our spending under control, but really this is pretty much over. Just trying to be cute with the swarm host one last time, but he's going to go ahead and stim and scan, and this is going to be the game. I'm actually curious. I think I do actually live a little longer, but nevertheless, I'm actually going to go ahead and double speed this, because there's not a lot to watch here from this point onward. Alright, so I lose my third, he cuts me off, get caught out of position with my swarm hosts, and there's a nice big drop up top. Finally, another cleanup. And I actually do hold out really well here, surprisingly, considering how bad my spending was. Trying to sneak a base, all sorts of cuteness going on at this point. Might even call this BM on my part. I could have left a long time ago, but it never feels like it's a good idea for me to leave when I have swarm hosts in play. It's just kind of one of those situations where as long as you have swarm hosts, just keep playing. You'll eventually, hopefully, win. It doesn't always work that way, but you still have a chance as long as you've got a decent swarm host count. Okay, so that was our first game, and obviously that wasn't a very successful game for me. Let's look at our second game. And this game, I went into it saying, okay, first off, that mineral float's unacceptable. How can I solve that? Okay, well, if I'm trying to survive, and I know I'll be pulling queens frequently, and I know medevac drops are pretty damn good, I also know that widow mines are pretty damn good, well, what deals with those? Well, static defense. So that's where this game's going to play out, with that in mind the entire time. Again, I'm the Zerg player bottom left. Bonachan, I don't know if I'm saying that right, from Team RF, is going to be our blue Terran in the top right. Alright, so not much is going to change in the early game since this is 2 consecutive casts, and I will wear myself out if I do the entire thing. Let's go ahead and cruise a little bit. So we go ahead and have our opening. This is a 2-player map. I go ahead and drone scout. I'm going to go ahead and take a look. I'm able to delay him a little bit. He's kind of microing around there while his SCV arrives. I think I actually go up to 17 for that because I recognize that I was able to delay his barracks a tiny bit. So I do like to push out that pool timing a little bit. And then I notice he's not gassed up yet, so that's why there's a spine rather than 4 Zerglings. And he is, in fact, going to go ahead and gasless expand. And we're ready to go ahead and get into the actual game. So let's switch over to my view. Thus far, all I've seen is gasless expand, and we're going ahead and droning like a madman. I love this versus gasless, because you can pretty much count on there being Hellions to follow up. They need to establish map control, and since they're not making Reapers, they're going to have to do it in another fashion. Now, I mean, generally you can just guarantee there's going to be Hellions no matter what. It feels like such a guaranteed stage of the game. But with gasless, you've got a really healthy window that you don't otherwise have. So that means I can go up to 6 queens in this case, I believe. Yeah, 6 queens, good fun. While still reaching a very respectable drone count. And I love this early bump up in queens because the creep spread is just phenomenal. And that's such a defensive boon. It's something that just really is kind of undervalued. Because, especially versus Terran, your opponent oftentimes doesn't want to tech over into Raven. And so you're actually looking at a pretty significant loss of resources every time they cut back your creep, when it doesn't really cost you anything to generate the creep tumors. They're losing, what is it, 280 minerals per scan, 260, something around there. So every time they scan to clean up your creep tumors, you know, great, they're cleaning up creep spread, but that's costing them Marines, that's costing them Marauders and Hellions. So this is, you know, not only defensive, but it's actually punishing your opponent's economy a little bit. Okay, so Let's actually look at the production tab here. Since I did go ahead and go gasless for a little bit, I do like to go ahead and get the metabolic boost, get the speedlings. This gives me a little more mobility because drop plays a little spooky at this stage of the game. I need something that's going to be able to keep up with the medevacs, and the roaches won't be able to do it until I have my layer tech finished. Getting the double evo chamber, I do like to make sure to get those 1-1 missile carapace going, and once we get to a stage where we can commit to banelings heavily, I'm going to cut the speedlings entirely and just mix in some banelings here and there to help zone him out. Now we already start to see me getting some spine coverage, but nothing too terribly aggressive, since all I've seen thus far is high-ends. And let's go ahead and go back to our economy, because I think that's going to be the really important thing. We want to look at the point where I get to 70 plus drones, because that's where that critical decision making comes in that says, okay, this time I'm going to make a whole bunch of spines rather than staying at 80 drones. I'm also not double expanding, just single expanding, and that's because I'm up against gasless expand as well. I don't necessarily want to hit the roach push into double expand versus gasless, because I can pretty much guarantee he's going to have at least one bunker, possibly two, and gasless does play into Marauder a little better. Sometimes it can even go directly into Marauder, which is really bad for a roach push. Alright, so immediately dropping my infestation pit and baneling nest. The reason is because actually in this case my upgrades are a little bit later. I get in, I see double engineering bay, so I know I'm going to be a tiny bit behind on upgrades. And I do like to get some infestors a little earlier than I normally would to help compensate for that and to stall out even better against drops and biomine pushes, because infestors actually play really well with spines, as I'm sure anyone who's watched some of the old infestor play has seen. Destiny and whatnot would do the 20 spines per base plus a few infestors. Works wonders. Still occurs that way, not quite as well, but nevertheless it still can be a huge help. So I'm getting 5 infestors. I'm also getting centrifugal hooks. I don't want infestors to be a huge chunk of my army, but they're just more there to help provide me with an extra response to drops, an extra way of making sure that he's punished for getting a little too close to the spines. So here we start to see it, and let's look at where my drones are. Notice they're still not over 70, and I'm already dropping down a bunch of extra spines and spores. And this is so heavy, but keep in mind, I've just now seen he's going to probably take his third. I haven't confirmed it yet, but he wouldn't generally take that time to take the third unless he's going to capitalize on it. So since I'm on Swarm Host, or I'm moving into Swarm Host, I'm okay with equal bases the entire game. There's no pressure for me to take a fourth. It would be nice, but sometimes that fourth can actually be a liability that you just can't afford. So this is great. I'm on 3 base. I have enough drones to make up for his mule advantage. I maybe even want to make some more spores and spines here. Hopefully when I hold off this aggression, that's what's going to happen, because right now I'm a little high on drones. But keep in mind, we want to be at 70 to 80 drones until the point that we are able to max. Then we want to be down to 65 to 70. And the reason that I was really harping on last game for me being up at 80 drones is because there's no reason for me to be at 80 drones with 1,500 minerals sitting around that they could have then been turned into spores and spines. So pretty good fungals here. Get the follow-up, so that's great for me. That's where those infestors already are punishing this a little bit. And I did see some of these widow mines positioning earlier, so now I'm able to go ahead and clean them up. And this is important right here. That micro, super important. If you notice that they have their widow mines spread wide rather than packed tight, you can actually snipe them one at a time with your roaches before they're able to fire. If they're tightly packed, then you're going to want to shoo them away with the queens. Once they unburrow, you move in with the roaches and try and clean them up before they can get away. But yeah, if they're burrowed well spaced like that, then you go ahead and just shuffle down the line and try and snipe each one before it fires. Okay, so here it is. It's getting really crazy here with the spores and spines. And this is just me looking up at my resource count saying, okay, we're getting over 1,000. Let's go ahead and clean that up. And let's buy some more time so that we can continue pushing this advantage. And we take our fourth, but we take it immediately with 3 spines and 2 spores. And this, I think, is just so important, that the base starts defended. It's not something where we respond to them shutting it down and then make the spines and spores. And the weird thing is, once upon a time I maybe would have said, well, duh, that's a pretty basic concept. But somewhere in there, got really confident with not needing static defense, and a lot of Zerg players have. I mean, we're just neglecting them at a time when the metagame dictates that we need more static defense than ever. And the moment he drops, notice what happens. You know, rather than losing those drones, let's go ahead and drop a whole bunch more spores and spines, because why the hell not? So it's becoming something where I might even just make it a part of my rotation. I make 5 or 6 spores and spines somewhere, I make 5 or 6 more drones. I just repeat that process throughout the entire game. Wherever I see a hole, I just fill it up with spores and spines. Which, wow, that sounds really dirty if you think about it. Okay, never mind. Anyways. So, more and more here, I'm starting to feel comfortable. But notice how late my swarm hosts were. 17 minutes. That's super late. Versus Protoss, that would just be so ridiculously stupid. You would be dead to Colossus long ago. But because he hasn't gone Siege Tank, there's nothing stopping me. And already we're getting some efficiency. So now we get the fun part. We get to see just how efficient on losses Transfuse and Locust is. So keep in mind he's up on upgrades. Let's see, we got 2-2 to 2-1, so he's not that far up, but still. I'm starting to pull ahead. Now notice I was behind on losses until just now. And that was largely because of the engagement in the mid there. Had a few bad, well, not too bad of a trade, but considering it was biomine, it's kind of hard to have a good trade when you're not yet at your static defense, or you don't get a good fungal. Alright, so at this point, he's been pushed back, and that's when it opens up that huge swarm host spawn. And all the while, notice what's accompanying it. I'm keeping my resources low, rather than by a means of, oh, let's hit all my injects, because I'm not injecting anymore. I'm keeping my resources low by saying, oh yeah, these drones, they aren't needed anymore, let's make them into spines. Now, I go a little bit too crazy with it. If I remember right, I'm under like 50 drones at the end of this game, but I am maxed. And that's the important part. If you want to go 50 drones at 200 supply with 24 swarm hosts, then rock on. As long as your swarm host management's good, then that's going to be phenomenal. Especially because of how supply efficient swarm hosts are. People complain about them being 3 supply, whatever, but for the amount of supply they cost, they are absolutely amazing. So, I mean, my front door, until he has siege, is virtually impervious. It's just not... I mean, he could break through that in a trade and probably come out on top with a 200 supply army, but he's going to lose a good quarter to half of it, which is pretty damn good considering my army can be somewhere else. Alright, so catch him looking away for a second there. He was just going to clean up some creep and go manage his base probably. So when you get that opportunity, you want to move command in a little bit. That way you've got nice wide surface area for your locust. Otherwise it'll trigger a our units are under attack message, and they'll pull back the moment your locusts get into range. So that's kind of just a fun little tip that you can use. It's a bit of a gamble because once in a while they'll see them moving into range, and you won't get much of any damage done because maybe they'll lift up. But more often than not, it's better than letting them attack move. Alright, so at this point he's recognizing, well, this is getting really grim. He's got a lot of swarm hosts. Let's go for the doom drop. And that's, you know, about as good as he can hope for. I think this is the right play. So I'm going to lob a few infested Terrans. Now, the one thing that's really annoying here is I did block off my army with my swarm hosts, because immediately my response is, okay, let's go ahead and attack with my swarm hosts. And this is what you need to do. Actually, I want to pause for this. When your opponent goes for the doom drop, your first instinct is to say, oh my god, what if I lose my main? Okay, let's start burrowing swarm hosts and sending locusts, and oh, I hope they get there in time. They won't. They just won't. Versus Marine Marauder Medevac, you will probably never connect with this Marine Marauder if he knows what he's doing. So these swarm hosts, I mean, if you've got them defensive versus drop play, they might as well not even exist. They're just completely wasted supply. But the important thing is, he just engaged, he lost a lot, he's been ahead on supply for quite a while because of how supply efficient Queen Swarm Host is. Now he's behind on supply, so that's indicative of quite a few losses. He also had quite a bit of his army committed to the drop. What that means is unless he just magically has a whole bunch of Widow Mines burrowed that I'm going to walk into, which, side note, I've been trying to get in the habit of throwing some changelings in front of my Swarm Host army to make sure that doesn't happen. But what that means is I can now go ahead and get into a position. Now, it's a very slight gamble because if you're not watching him and he stems forward, gets this lucky stem, or he's map hacking, which seems to be more and more common lately, that's going to go really poorly. But otherwise, you're going to get into a great position, and optimally what you're looking to do is hit right about here. because then you're catching his reinforcements to his third, you're catching his reinforcements to his fourth. Most importantly, you're catching his attempts to attack you, because he'll then have to walk basically through the locust or flank all the way around, at which point that's when you want to make sure you recognize when his army's moving to a flank and pull your swarm host back. So whenever you see a doom drop, don't get scared. See that as your opportunity. That's actually when you want to go for the throat. And so, I'm doing pretty well at cleaning this up. And Roach Queen Hydra Baneling, especially if you've got a few infestors to support, they're going to do pretty well. Equal army value, I would even say, especially because you're going to be able to kind of push them into your spores, push them into your spines, and that's going to work out just fine. So now I'm at 57 drones, and I'm way up on army value. If we go ahead and take a look at this, check that out. That is huge supply efficiency. There we go. That last production wave just went through. So we're at 200 supply, and I'm at 8,400 minerals, 3,500 army, or 3,500 gas. I would say maybe mass battlecruiser Raven could be more supply efficient than that. Oh, these guys are totally going to die. Maybe mass Raven battlecruiser could be more supply efficient than that, but otherwise, they're just not even going to be able to come close. Alright, so let's go ahead and switch this back to income, because it is kind of fun to see just how much my drone count dwindles as I continue with this spore spine process, and I'm just continuing to dump that into more and more army. And that's okay. I mean, honestly, as long as my locusts are continuing to do damage, I can go down as low as probably 50 drones, and as long as I'm at 200 supply, then that's pretty awesome, because that's just giving me that much more potency whenever I directly engage. And that is really something that's important, because these swarm hosts, they don't provide any potency whatsoever in a direct engagement. In fact, if he's playing it correctly, he'll never direct engage when the locusts are part of your army. He's going to wait for them to walk by, he's going to dodge them, then he's going to try and clean up. So you do still need a ton of supply tied up in Roach Queen, Roach Hydra Queen, maybe a few Banelings would be great here. But notice what this is allowing me to do. The locusts are splitting him up, and he's going to go ahead and take a great engagement. I was hoping to catch him split up, and instead I actually walked into probably the biggest concave I've ever seen. But because I was rocking such a huge supply advantage, and such a high supply efficiency, yeah, I totally said rocking, I'm a total dork, I know. I was able to take pretty significant losses, but deal enough losses in exchange that it gave me great positioning on my swarm host. He had to use a ton of stims for that damage. He was low on medevacs, and now he's really running out of steam as far as his ability to deal with the locust, because your Roach Queen is fairly expendable. He really needs to clean up those swarm hosts, or else this just becomes an endlessly losing battle for him. And keep in mind, all of this was allowed by what we looked at in the earlier stages of the game, particularly right around that 10 to 12 minute mark when I started dropping the spores and spines. I've always known that swarm hosts had huge potential versus bio. Now, the problem that I've always had is that's all well and good, but if I'm down to only 2 base and I've lost my main by the time the swarm hosts pop, then who cares? So that's where I'm trying to shore up that weakness and just accept the fact that if he is going to go biomine, I'm going to have to be happy with equal economy at best. And as we see here, that's just fine, because once the swarm hosts are out, Zerg is the more efficient race, by far. Alright, so Benachan actually, it was kind of a joke on the stream that he was going to rage, because every time that I actually managed to beat a Terran, which actually, I guess this season my Terran win rate's not as bad. Last season I ended at like 38%, because I was just trying so many different things. But it's kind of an ongoing joke on the stream that whenever I actually do manage to beat the Terran rages and says that swarm hosts are OP. So it was kind of cool to see Bonachan actually really respectable there, really nice. Just asked how do you beat it. That was pretty cool. So there you have it. I hope this gives us something to kind of move forward with, both me personally as something to work with for improving, but also you guys as just kind of some food for thought as to, if you're going to go swarm host, and maybe just as a Zerg player in general versus biomine, some reshaping of how we make our spores and spines and how we standardize that needs to happen, because I don't think our standard, let's make 2 spines and a spore per base, I don't think that's working. I think that's just setting us up for failure, because the bio medevac portion is very efficient against such a low spine count, and the mines are capitalizing on the lack of static defense, which is probably their biggest weakness. Okay, so that's it. Super long cast, so let me know what you guys think. If it was too long to watch, if it got boring after a while, or vice versa, if you liked it a lot and you learned a lot from it, let me know. If this is something you guys get a lot out of, I'll definitely do more, because I think this is a great learning process for me as well. Okay, that's it. Thanks for watching.